"I won't be late," Morgan promised, leaving her sister at school before rushing to the bus stop. The February wind was biting, making it difficult to breathe. She hoped the bus wouldn't be late. She had to be at work on time for the morning shift. Fortunately, the bus arrived promptly and was surprisingly half empty, a rare occurrence. Morgan settled into her favourite seat by the window. She leaned back, ready for the comfortable 40-minute ride across the city. Today her mind was on Iris's after-school care. The school only offered this service to first graders. What would they do next year? Their home was quite a distance from the school. In the mornings, a neighbour whose son had attended the school gave them a lift. But what about the trip back? Morgan imagined her petite, fair-haired sister with a large backpack getting home alone. She would be all by herself in the big city, and then in their rough neighbourhood, where stray dogs and gangs of street kids roamed freely. There was no one to meet Iris. Morgan was always at work or studying. Their father had passed away long ago, and their mother? Morgan's heart ached with sorrow whenever she thought about their situation. Initially, life had been good. Morgan lived with her parents in a small but cosy city apartment. She didn't know that the apartment was co-owned by her father and his two brothers. Their family was just allowed to live there. Her mother was young, healthy and beautiful, working as a teacher in the school just across the courtyard. Her father worked as a foreman at a factory, physically tired but always making time for his daughter after work. They would go for walks, shop together and talk about various topics. Morgan cherished the evenings when they played board games as a family. Then, suddenly, their happy, carefree life ended. It started with an accident at the factory where Morgan's father worked. There was a fire in the workshop. Many were seriously injured, but Morgan's father died. Morgan's mother was devastated, but tried to stay strong for Morgan. Her grandmother, Morgan's father's mother, was heartbroken over the loss of her youngest son. Morgan's grandmother suffered a stroke, and seeing her once vibrant and cheerful in a hospital bed was terrifying. Morgan and her mother visited her, and it was painful to witness her decline. Morgan feared that her grandmother might suffer the same fate as her father. Amidst this turmoil, another significant event unfolded. Morgan's mother discovered she was pregnant. This news would have been joyous under different circumstances, but given the current situation, it brought more anxiety than happiness. Morgan's mother confided in her mother-in-law, the only adult she could turn to for support, and the woman pleaded with her mother daily to keep the baby, while her mother wavered, filled with doubt and fear. "This is a blessing," she exclaimed. "My son did not leave us for nothing. He has left another child on this earth. We will raise this baby together." Morgan smiled, comforted by her grandmother's use of "we," signifying that her mother would not be alone in her struggles. Her mother expressed her fears openly. She would soon be unable to work, and they still lacked their own apartment, living in her mother-in-law's home. Her grandmother reassured her, promising to transfer the apartment to them as soon as she was discharged from the hospital. She acknowledged that her elder sons were already established, and that Morgan's family needed the home more urgently. Despite initial resistance from her sons, Morgan's grandmother remained resolute. After this conversation, Morgan's mother found some peace and finally decided to keep the baby. Morgan's spirits lifted, and though the sorrow of losing her father remained, she now looked forward to the joyous arrival of a new sibling. There was much to prepare: a crib to buy, clothes to gather, and countless details to arrange before the baby's birth. Morgan determined to be her mother's primary helper. Together they would manage, her mother, Morgan, and her grandmother, who vowed to recover fully by the time her youngest grandchild was born. Sadly, her grandmother's health fluctuated, improving one moment only to worsen the next. She remained in the hospital, eager to resolve the apartment documentation, but her condition deteriorated rapidly. Tragically, she passed away from another stroke, leaving Morgan and her mother to face their future alone. When Morgan learned of her grandmother's death, she was filled with anger at the cruelty of fate, which seemed to deliver one blow after another. Only later did sadness, fear, and grief set in. In time, little Iris was born, named in honour of her grandmother, whose encouragement had made her existence possible. The family faced difficult times. Morgan's mother could no longer work, and child support payments were meagre. They had to economise severely. There was no grandmother to help with money, clothes or food. Sometimes Morgan and her mother subsisted on beans and cheap pasta for weeks. Bread with butter and sugar was considered a delicacy. Morgan wore old clothes to school until they became too small or worn out. It was embarrassing at times. She wanted to dress as nicely as her classmates. One day, one of the rich girls from her class disdainfully commented that she would never dress her enemy in an old sweater like Morgan's, saying it was outdated and unfashionable. Morgan lowered her eyes, knowing the sweater had belonged to her mother. It was warm and suitable for school, even if not stylish. They simply couldn't afford anything else. Morgan blushed deeply, but didn't tell her mother about the incident, knowing she had enough worries. Iris brought joy to their lives. She was a sweet, healthy and charming little girl who seemed to sense the family's struggles and tried not to cause additional stress. When Iris was a few months old, their mother found part-time work, cleaning stairwells early in the morning and late at night. Morgan enjoyed taking care of Iris during these hours, dressing her up, playing with her, and making her smile. Iris adored her older sister, and her name was one of her first words. With their mother's additional income, their financial situation improved slightly. Soon, Iris will grow up and go to kindergarten, and I'll return to school, their mother would say, rocking her little daughter, and we'll be happy again. Morgan smiled, glad to see her mother regaining her strength and hope after their losses, her husband's death and her mother-in-law's sudden passing. However, their trials were not over. Just as Morgan and her mother thought their lives were stabilising, another blow struck. Morgan's grandmother had passed away without officially transferring the apartment to her daughter-in-law and granddaughter. Her elder sons, Morgan's uncles, decided to sell the apartment. "Gwen, we understand your situation, but we can't wait," Uncle Christopher said. "We've found a buyer for the apartment." Morgan's mother gasped, and Morgan froze. "The apartment is legally owned by the three brothers," Christopher continued. "You'll get your third, and we'll take ours. We need the money too." "But how can you do this to us?" Morgan's mother pleaded. "It's all legal," Christopher insisted. Morgan burst into the kitchen, clutching Iris. "Grandma wanted to leave the apartment to us because we need it," she cried. "Don't you understand?" Her mother asked her to leave, her voice distant and unfamiliar. Morgan complied, unsure if her mother was angry or grateful for her outburst. Her heart was heavy with worry and fear for their future. She didn't go far, of course. It was important for her to know what was happening. "Yes, Mother mentioned something about giving you the apartment," Uncle Christopher continued. "But the woman wasn't herself after the stroke. She never fully recovered, so you can't trust those words. Besides, it's unheard of to deprive other children and grandchildren of their inheritance. No, Mother would never do such a thing. Gwen, we didn't have to share anything with you. I even suggested we shouldn't. I need the money. But Christopher insisted, so don't make a scene, and don't involve the children. We could change our minds at any moment." Uncle Sasha interjected, having been silent until then. Thus, Morgan, Iris and their mother were left without an apartment, without the cosy warm nest where they had been so happy and at peace. The money their generous uncles provided was only enough to buy a small old house in a village on the outskirts, accessible only by a suburban bus. The house was in dire need of repair. The wallpaper was peeling, and yellow stains adorned the ceiling, but it was habitable. The small, dilapidated house came with a plot of land and a garden filled with cherry trees. Morgan loved this aspect. Now she could sunbathe or read under the shade of the trees in summer, while Iris played nearby in the sandbox, building castles and digging holes to bury treasures. It was pleasant, but the drawbacks were numerous, the most significant being the inconvenient location. Iris's kindergarten was in the same village, it was a plus. But the school where Morgan studied and their mother worked after maternity leave was in the city centre, a 40-minute bus ride away, longer if there was traffic. So after getting Iris to kindergarten, they would rush home, get ready and hurry to the bus stop to come on time. However, those days when Morgan rode the bus to school with her mother were happy ones for the girl. Why? Because her mother was nearby, healthy and full of energy. They talked and discussed things on the way, walked to school together, and saw each other in the hallways during breaks. Her mother's smile warmed her heart. But then her mother had a stroke at work. Morgan sensed something was wrong when she saw the teachers rushing about and an ambulance at the school gates. She never imagined it involved her mother. Later, she was called to the director's office and informed of the news. Morgan was terrified, remembering her grandmother's fate after a stroke. Her mother was young, beautiful and energetic, never complaining about her health. Morgan was in her last year of school, and Iris was 4. Ideally, with their mother in such a state, the girls should have been placed in an orphanage. Fortunately, Juniper, their mother's friend and colleague, stepped in. She signed some papers, and the girls moved in with her temporarily. Juniper lived near the school in a spacious 3-bedroom apartment. One room was occupied by her mother, who had long dreamed of grandchildren. She joyfully welcomed the girls and cared for them. Life with Juniper was comfortable, but both girls worried about their mother. Even Iris, too young to understand, constantly asked when their mother would return from the hospital and cried in the evenings, missing her bedtime stories and gentle touch. Initially, their mother was in critical condition. Juniper visited the hospital almost daily and spoke with the doctors, keeping Morgan informed. "The doctors aren't giving any prognosis," the woman sighed. "Her condition is severe but stable. Even if she survives, she might be disabled. Do you understand what that means, Morgan?" Morgan didn't fully comprehend, but she didn't care if her mother was disabled as long as she was alive and with them. Eventually, her mother's youthful body recovered from the stroke. She was moved from the intensive care unit to a regular ward and allowed visitors. Seeing her mother again was pure joy for Morgan. Her mother had changed. She was thin, pale and fragile, lacking her usual confidence and inner strength. But she was alive, and that was all that mattered. Despite her efforts to stay strong, Morgan could see the toll her mother's illness had taken. On the day of her discharge, the girl accompanied her mother to the doctor's office, where the reality of the situation became clear. Her mother looked frail and pale, her gaze filled with confusion. The illness had left her weakened, requiring long-term rehabilitation. She could barely move around the apartment, let alone take Iris to kindergarten or pick her up. Work was out of the question. The doctor shook his head regretfully. "It's a shame there's no way to afford specialised rehabilitation. Time is of the essence. Missing this window could mean some functions never fully recover." Morgan fought back tears, knowing she had to be strong. She was the only one who could care for her mother and Iris now. After the stroke, their lives changed drastically. Morgan's mother could no longer work or manage household chores. Her weakened hands struggled to hold a pot or chop vegetables. She spent much of her time in bed, but diligently practiced walking around the apartment and lifting light weights. Despite her efforts, her condition seemed to worsen, and she grew increasingly frail. At 14, Morgan took on the responsibilities of an adult. She cooked, cleaned, cared for Iris, and assisted her mother, all while keeping up with her studies. The hardest part was accompanying her mother to the doctor. These trips were challenging. Morgan had to help her mother down the steep stairs and into a taxi. Her mother would tire easily, pausing to rest, her eyes filled with sadness and frustration. She was angry at her body, at her helplessness, and very sorry for her daughters, who had to deal with such a worthless mother. After all, even Julia, as she grew up, became a helper for her mother. She would pour her tea, feed her, read the newspaper to her. The worst thing was that the condition of their mother was deteriorating. She seemed to be slowly fading away, becoming weaker and more helpless, and this despite constant training. Doctors said that this was a natural process, that the woman needed expensive rehabilitation with specialists, and that home exercises were ineffective. She was taken several times to a free health centre, but it was of little use. Classes of the wrong intensity, poorly equipped halls, lack of the necessary exercise equipment and medications. In general, in vain, only tortured the patient with these fees and moves. And still Morgan was happy that their mother was near, because as long as a person is alive, everything can be corrected, everything can be changed. Morgan remained hopeful, dreaming of the day she could afford her mother's treatment. She studied hard, focusing on her goal of becoming a translator. With a donated by Juniper laptop, she took online language courses and watched films in German and French, honing her skills. When the time came, Morgan easily gained admission to any university in the capital, but she couldn't leave her mother and Iris. Instead, she enrolled in a local college to stay close to them. Money was tight. Her mother's disability pension and child benefits barely covered their expenses. Iris was growing up and needed better nutrition, extracurricular activities, and decent clothing. Morgan knew she needed a job to make ends meet. Balancing work, studies, and household duties was challenging, but Morgan was no stranger to hardship. She found a job as a kitchen assistant in a chain restaurant, determined to do whatever it took to support her family. She had to perform a variety of duties, loading and unloading dishwashers, cleaning vegetables, dealing with delivery personnel and movers, and monitoring order wait times. The work wasn't particularly difficult, but it required a high level of engagement, attention and agility. The pay wasn't exceptional, but it was around the average salary for the city. Sometimes she had to work night shifts, since the restaurant operated 24/7. It was tough to stay awake during college lectures afterward, but Morgan managed, having no other choice. Her mother felt sorry for her eldest daughter. Sometimes tears welled up in her mother's eyes from helplessness. It was hard for her to watch her child struggle, barely resting, juggling studies, household chores and work. Morgan slept a maximum of 4 hours a night, often less. Her mother wished she could help, but her own strength was waning, her limbs growing weaker. "You're suffering because of me," her mother would sigh. "It would be better if you sent me to a nursing home. It would be easier for you, and you could take custody of Iris to keep her out of an orphanage. You're an adult now. It would be simpler for the two of you without me." "Don't say such things," Morgan would protest. "Of course we won't send you anywhere. Everything will be fine. Soon I'll finish college, find a good job, and we'll have money to get you the treatment you need. You'll be as good as new." Morgan, now grown, still believed this would happen. Her mother, however, seemed to have lost hope long ago. During her second year at college, Morgan met Daniel. He had come to the city from a village and was studying to be an engineer. Like Morgan, he was determined to achieve his goals, to become a qualified specialist, earn a decent living, own a large apartment and drive a good car. Daniel's childhood had been marked by poverty. His mother had raised him and his younger sisters alone, a strong, uneducated woman, striving to provide for her children. Now, Daniel wanted to repay his mother's sacrifices and help his sisters establish themselves. Morgan understood him well. Daniel was kind and straightforward, without any pretenses. He also juggled studies and work, assisting a master at a factory, essentially learning the ropes of his future profession. They met by chance on a bus. Morgan hadn't expected such old-fashioned encounters still happened in their time. Most of her peers found partners online, but here she was, meeting someone on a bus. Daniel offered her his seat. The bus wasn't packed, but there weren't enough seats for everyone. Morgan hesitated, insisting she could stand, but Daniel persisted. As they talked, Morgan noticed his striking green eyes, warm and sincere, and his open smile. He seemed genuinely interested in her, even admiring. They chatted easily, as if they had known each other for years. Daniel even got off the bus with her 7 stops past his own. "Do you live nearby?" Morgan asked, surprised. "No," he admitted. "I just didn't want to say goodbye yet." Nervously, Daniel asked if she'd like to see a movie that evening. Morgan had the day off work, and with meals prepared and the house clean, she agreed. It was her first date. After the movie, they strolled through the city holding hands, feeling a mutual warmth and joy. They talked and got to know each other better. Daniel shared his story, living in a student dorm, studying, working part-time and sending money to his mother and sisters. He dreamed of becoming a successful professional and improving his family's life. Morgan opened up about her own struggles. Daniel listened attentively, offering words of encouragement. It was clear he felt for her. "You're not alone now," he said, seriously looking into her eyes. "I'm here, and I'll help you. It's no trouble. In fact, it makes me happy." Morgan felt Daniel meant it. He was reliable and a man of action, not just words. She felt a weight lift from her shoulders, realizing she didn't have to bear her burdens alone. From that day forward, Daniel was always there. His presence made a significant difference in their lives. He fixed leaky faucets, repaired walls, and insulated the house, making it warmer and cozier. He was also skilled at household chores, cooking meals for days and hand-washing large items that didn't fit in their small washing machine. Morgan gratefully accepted Daniel's help. She felt no awkwardness about it, for they had quickly become close, almost like family. Daniel charmed both Morgan's mother and little Iris. Iris was especially enamoured with Daniel. As the brother of 3 younger sisters, he knew exactly how to delight a little girl. He crafted a large wooden dollhouse for her, and Iris gasped in awe at the sight of it. She had never owned such a magnificent toy. Daniel then went on to create tiny furniture for the dollhouse. Together, they seriously discussed the design of the sofas and tables, and chose the colours for the curtains that hung over windows. Morgan watched them with a smile, thinking that Daniel would make an excellent father to their future children. Neither of them doubted that their wedding would take place. It was simply a matter of timing. For now, both needed to complete their studies, establish their careers, and find their footing in life. Morgan felt grateful for their chance encounter, seeing Daniel as a gift from fate, a reward for her life filled with hardships and deprivations. With him by her side, she felt a sense of peace and tranquility, a respite for her soul. He effortlessly shouldered some of her burdens. Daniel always assured her that everything would be all right, and Morgan believed him. He was a man of his word. Thinking of Daniel, Morgan smiled. Outside the window, the cityscape rushed by. The journey was still long, but that was fine. It gave her time to rest after the morning's rush. She looked forward to having the evening to be home with her mother, who had been feeling unwell lately, especially at night. People said that changes in weather affected the sick more profoundly. Daniel promised to visit in the evening, and perhaps even stay the night. His presence always brought comfort and security. As the bus approached her stop, Morgan felt a pang of regret that her moment of rest was over. Now she would have to rush around the restaurant kitchen like a busy hamster in the wheel. Yet she enjoyed her job. The kitchen staff were friendly and supportive, always ready to lend a hand or cover a shift when needed. They found time to chat, share important news, and even laugh together. Many of her colleagues were students like herself, juggling work and studies, so they understood each other well. The manager, Gregory, however, was an unpleasant character. Initially, Morgan had found him likeable, not for his appearance. He was a large, imposing figure with a protruding belly, a perpetually sweaty forehead, and small, piercing black eyes, but for his understanding and kindness. He had listened to her story, empathised with her difficult situation, and even arranged a convenient work schedule for her. Gregory was generous with bonuses and always inquired about her well-being. She saw him as a kind, caring person, almost like an uncle. Having never experienced such familial support, Morgan cherished this attention. However, it was not long before she realised the true nature of his interest. Gregory frequently called her into his office to discuss work matters and sometimes her family. Morgan even confided in him about her fatigue, believing he understood her struggles, as he had 2 daughters of his own. One day, during one of these private conversations, Gregory moved closer to Morgan and put his arm around her. She was taken aback. The touch made her uncomfortable. Thoughts fluttered in her mind like startled birds. What should she do? Protest? But what if she had only imagined Gregory's advances? She didn't want to seem foolish or unnecessarily offend him, so Morgan simply moved away, putting more distance between them. But Gregory was not ready to give up. "Morgan, I think it's time to stop beating around the bush. I'll be frank, I like you. You're beautiful, incredibly beautiful, young, vibrant and natural." Morgan was flustered. For the first time, compliments made her uncomfortable. Not just uncomfortable, but frightened. "I've been watching you for a long time," the man continued, "and I'm increasingly drawn to you. I can't help it. What do you say?" Morgan didn't know how to respond. Truthfully, she didn't want to say anything. She wanted to jump up and flee the office, far from those grasping black eyes and sweaty palms. Gregory no longer seemed like a jovial, harmless man. He was repulsive, yet he held the key to her livelihood. She could protest, be rude, but that would mean losing her job. The work schedule and pay at the restaurant suited her well. Where else could she find such a position, and how soon? She couldn't afford to be unemployed, even for 2 weeks. They simply wouldn't have enough money. "You're silent," Gregory observed. "Caught off guard, perhaps. Unexpected, isn't it?" "Yes," Morgan agreed sincerely. "Well, never mind. How about we go out today? To the hotel spa, for instance. It's very relaxing. Do you like spa?" Morgan couldn't bear to be near him any longer. She jumped up to leave, but Gregory grabbed her arm. Struggling was futile. She could feel his strength. "Perhaps I rushed things," he said, puzzled. Regret and disappointment flickered in his small dark eyes. "You're not like the others, pure and innocent. And here I am inviting you to the hotel and spa. I'm sorry. I will wait until you are ready for me." Morgan nodded. He loosened his grip and she finally escaped his office. She rushed to the restroom, locked herself in a stall and let the tears flow. A storm of emotions overwhelmed her. Fear, disgust, and a strange sense of guilt. She told no one about the incident, not her mother, to avoid worrying her, nor Daniel, fearing he might confront her boss. Her colleagues, however, noticed the change. Gregory began appearing more frequently in the kitchen or summoning Morgan to his office. "Is the boss hitting on you?" Matilda, the kitchen's seasoned cook, asked bluntly one day. Married and experienced in matters of the heart, she had a keen eye for such things. "I can see how he looks at you, practically drooling, and I notice how you avoid him." Morgan didn't deny it. She had longed to share her ordeal with someone and perhaps seek advice. "Well, well," Matilda whistled after hearing Morgan's story. Gregory the romantic. He'll wait, he says. Men always the same, no matter their age. So what are you going to do?" "What do you mean?" Morgan asked, confused. "I mean, you've kept him on the hook long enough. His interest in you is at its peak. You've played your cards right, girl. But be careful. He might get angry if you push him too far." "I don't understand," Morgan said, bewildered. "Come on," Matilda said, growing impatient. "Don't you see? It's time to give him a sign. He's not a boy. He won't wait forever." "What sign?" Morgan exclaimed. "I want him to leave me alone." "Really?" Matilda asked, surprised. "I thought you were leading him on, planning to take advantage later. But now I see that you're serious." "Matilda, he's disgusting. Married with daughters, how could he?" Matilda shook her head. "You should know by now that men like him often seek thrills elsewhere." "This is awful. I don't want this. It's disgusting. And he's a vile, fat, repulsive man." You're overreacting. He's just a man with money. In your situation, Gregory is a great option. Think about it. He has money. He could buy medicine for your mother, pay for her treatment. You'd live comfortably, at least for a while. Use him to your advantage while he's infatuated. Get the most out of him. Think about it. But Morgan couldn't bear the thought. No, never. She was repulsed by her boss's unwanted attention, his leering glances, and his sweet talk. He constantly sought opportunities to be alone with her, often arranging meetings on purpose. Now, Morgan understood his intentions all too well. She had noticed his behaviour before, but hadn't seen it as a romantic interest. She couldn't have imagined that Gregory saw her as a potential mistress. Ideally, she would quit, but she couldn't afford to. Gregory knew about her difficult situation and took advantage of it. For now, he behaved decently, keeping his hands to himself and not making any overt advances. But he was always nearby, watching and waiting. Morgan knew it was only a matter of time before his patience ran out. Today, Morgan was on the early shift. Her boss usually arrived around lunchtime, so she would have most of her workday without his unpleasant presence. She wouldn't have to constantly look over her shoulder, anticipating his next move. "Hey, gorgeous," Matilda greeted her. Already dressed in her white uniform and chef's hat, she held a ladle in her hand. "There's a conference at the business centre across the street, so we'll be swamped." The day was unfolding without any accidents. Lunchtime was hectic, with more customers than usual due to the conference, but the team handled it flawlessly, ensuring every guest left satisfied and well fed. After the lunch rush, a lull set in, as it often did. The restaurant operated in cycles, with periods of calm between the busy times. Now, only a few patrons lingered, including a group of student friends chatting animatedly in the corner, their notebooks spread out on the table. Watching them, Morgan thought about her upcoming exams and wished she had more time to study. Daniel had offered to help, suggesting he could cover her shifts so she could focus on her studies. She had no doubt he could handle it. He was an excellent cook and got along well with her mother and Iris, but Morgan didn't want to take advantage of him. He had his own studies and work, not to mention his family responsibilities. Morgan scrubbed the sink, her thoughts turning to her mother. Her health had declined rapidly, and she urgently needed rehabilitation. The doctor had warned that time was running out, and soon no amount of money would help. But the sum the doctors quoted was beyond their means, and even Daniel couldn't help with that. Morgan hadn't even told him the amount, not wanting to burden him with her worries. She appreciated his support and the help he provided, both emotionally and physically. Matilda, ever the cynic, called Daniel a pauper and advised Morgan to leave him and set her sights on someone like Gregory. "Sure, he's married and he'll probably get tired of you eventually," Matilda would say, "but for now he can't take his eyes off you. Use the situation to your advantage. Get your mother the treatment she needs, buy yourself some nice clothes, maybe even save up for a car while he's being generous." These conversations made Morgan sick to her stomach, yet she couldn't deny the cold logic in Matilda's words, as harsh as they were. In her situation, she couldn't afford grand, pure love or create a paradise in a humble abode with her beloved. She had to think of her family first. Fortunately, Gregory kept his behaviour in check. He continued to show Morgan attention, his gaze sometimes feeling like a physical touch, but he made no further direct advances or inappropriate gestures. However, he occasionally hinted that he was still waiting for her decision and hoped she would accept his proposal. Even with his restrained behaviour, Gregory frightened Morgan. The bonuses he generously awarded her each month brought little joy. She accepted them, as her family desperately needed the money, but she felt uneasy, sensing that his patience might one day run out, forcing her to quit. She even looked for other jobs, but found nothing suitable that met her requirements for schedule and pay. The restaurant offered the best conditions, and she saw no viable alternatives. The bell chimed again. Morgan didn't bother looking at the monitor, displaying the security camera feed. She was busy scrubbing the stove and lost in thought. "Well, look who has come," exclaimed Brian, a young waiter with movie star looks, who received particularly generous tips from older single women. "How did someone like her end up here?" chimed in another student waitress. Morgan finally glanced at the monitor. An elderly woman stood in the centre of the dining room, looking lost and improper amidst the luxurious decor. She was wrapped in a dirty old plaid, shivering, her hair dishevelled and her eyes filled with fear. "Some homeless lady," Matilda muttered, returning from the dining room. "She stinks. She'll scare off the customers." "Where's security?" Brian asked. "Paul asked the boss for a couple of hours off to pick up his son from an after-school club," Matilda explained. "Gregory agreed since nothing serious usually happens at this time." The internal phone rang. Matilda picked it up. "Yes, we saw her. Yes, of course. We were just about to ask her to leave. Obviously she's scaring the guests." Morgan watched the old woman, feeling a growing pity. Clearly, life had not been kind to her. The staff saw her as nothing more than a nuisance due to her poverty and appearance, denying her the basic dignity of seeking warmth. It was freezing outside. Perhaps she was hungry and hoping for kindness. Matilda and Brian hurried into the dining room. Morgan followed, fearing they might be harsh. She wanted to soften the interaction, to ensure the old woman wasn't frightened or humiliated. To her surprise, Matilda spoke politely. "Ma'am, may we help you with something?" Up close, the old woman's face and hands were visibly dirty, her hair matted with cobwebs. She seemed to have been living in a basement or near a heating pipe. "Such a nice place," the old woman murmured hopefully, looking at Matilda. Her eyes were a striking light blue, though slightly clouded. Morgan noted her elegant features and regal bearing, imagining she must have been beautiful in her youth. "I think I've been here before," the woman said. "That's unlikely," Matilda replied gently. "We must ask you to leave. You can't stay here unless you're placing an order. Those are the rules. You can warm up at the shopping centre around the corner." "No," the old woman insisted, shaking her head. "I'll stay here." She walked confidently to a window-side table, settled onto the couch, and leaned back with a contented smile. "She's not right in the head," Matilda whispered to Brian and Morgan. "We need to be careful. If she causes a scene, someone might record it and post it online. We don't need that kind of publicity." "Madam," Brian addressed the woman, "would you like to order something? You must place an order to stay here." "I would," the woman replied regally. At that moment she seemed more like a noble lady than a homeless person. "Do you have any money to pay for your order?" Matilda asked. The old woman was confused again, shoved her hands under her dirty plaid, probably in the pocket of her coat or down jacket. "I have no money," she said sadly. "It's all gone. Where is my card, my cash? I never leave home without cash." "Where do you live?" Morgan asked. "Maybe the old lady really does have a home. She's clearly not in her right mind. We should escort her or call someone from her family to pick her up. They might be worried sick, searching for their elderly relative." "I live in a big, beautiful house," the woman said, her gaze distant, as if looking through her companions. "It has a pool in the yard shaped like the letter L. Do you know such a place? Because that's my home, and I want to go there." "That place seems to only exist in your dreams," Brian sighed. Morgan could see he felt sorry for the homeless woman too. At that moment Gregory stormed into the room, his face a mask of fury. "Why are you still talking to her?" he shouted at his stunned employees. "Why haven't you thrown her out yet? I told you to get rid of her, not have a chat. Do you want her to bring bedbugs or something worse into our restaurant? I hate vagrants." The old woman trembled as she looked at the imposing figure, clearly terrified. Even his employees were frightened, let alone the frail woman. "Get out of here, you old hag!" he yelled in her face. "Get out, I said! Or do you want me to help you? I don't want to touch you, but I will if I have to." The old woman shook like a leaf, tears welling up in her pale blue eyes. "I should fire you," she whispered, her lips barely moving. "You're rude and cruel, but they are kind." Her words only enraged Gregory further. It was an irrational, uncontrolled outburst of anger. Morgan realised then that something was seriously wrong with her boss. No sane person would behave this way. "I'll escort her out," Morgan said, looking directly into Gregory's furious black eyes. He calmed down instantly, and Morgan felt a sense of power over him, but this realisation brought her no joy, only discomfort. "Fine, take her out," he said, his voice more composed. "But don't touch her, please." Morgan nodded and Gregory retreated to his office. The old woman, still shaking, watched him go. "Old, fat, and yet he drools over a young beauty," she muttered. "It's quite obvious. He's a lecher." Brian stifled a laugh, and Matilda smiled, shaking her head. "Our old lady is quite perceptive," she said. "You see what we have to deal with here," Morgan said, spreading her hands. "Let me escort you out." "Very well," the old woman agreed, rising from her seat and heading for the exit. Morgan walked beside her. "And where do you live?" Morgan asked as they made their way to the door. "I already told you, dear. A big house with an L-shaped pool, but I don't know where it is. So I sleep on the streets most nights." Morgan pondered this. What if it's not just rambling, as we first thought? There's something about her, her manner of speech, her bearing. She's not like other homeless people. She's like a general's wife. "And what is your name?" Morgan asked. "If only I knew, dear," the old woman replied sadly. "I dream of remembering who I am and where I live, but I can't. I've asked people for help, but they just shoo me away, thinking I'm crazy." "I believe you," Morgan said. "Wait for me here in the lobby. It's warm here. Don't go anywhere. I'll get my things and we'll go to the police station to file a report. We need to sort this out." "Really?" the old woman asked, surprised. "You care? Don't you have more important things to do?" "I do have things to do, but I care," Morgan smiled. "Tell me everything you remember about yourself." It was both touching and sad. The old woman couldn't believe someone was finally showing her kindness and attention. "I live on the streets, dear," she began. "I don't know how I ended up here or anything about my past. I can't even remember simple words sometimes. There's just this constant noise in my head, a buzzing that won't let me concentrate." The old woman recounted how she found herself wandering the train station square one cold winter day, dressed in light clothing. Passers-by stared at this strange old woman, some with disgust, others with pity. She found a discarded coat in a dumpster near the station and gratefully put it on, feeling its warmth, but finding food was more challenging. The old woman did not have any money on her, and despite her confusion and forgetfulness, she still knew that food in stores and cafes is not free. She was ashamed to ask for alms from people, but she had no other choice. She wanted to eat. Kind people, quickly enough, threw some change into this outstretched hand. The palm was quickly filled with coins and small bills thrown by people on the move. Not 15 minutes later, the old woman was approached by two scowling men who looked like homeless people. Without abuse, and politely enough, but with an obvious threat in their voices, they explained to the old woman that she had no right to stand there, that by her actions she was taking away bread from them, from the other beggars, and it would be dangerous to get in their way. The elderly woman apologized and hurried away. She desperately hoped only that she would remember her past, and then everything would be all right. Her head continued to rumble, her thoughts were confused. She found her first shelter in the nooks of alleyways, shielding herself from the biting cold with layers of tattered clothing and cardboard boxes. It was her first night on the streets, but sadly not her last. The woman began to adapt, her days filled with the endless search for sustenance. She scavenged through dumpsters for discarded food and accepted the occasional kindness from strangers. She learned the rhythm of the city, knowing when to appear at the market to gather unsold produce, and where to find the warmest spots to rest during the frigid nights. Despite her circumstances, she maintained a quiet dignity, her eyes reflecting a strength forged from years of resilience. She wandered the city, hoping to remember something or find someone who recognised her. Listening to the old lady's story, Morgan looked at her again. She seemed pitiful, dirty, ragged, frail, almost ethereal. Her face was weathered, her lips dry and cracked. Yet there was something about her that suggested she wasn't always a homeless beggar. Her speech was articulate, her manners noble, almost aristocratic. It was strange. "Have you remembered anything at all?" Morgan asked. "Nothing," the old woman replied. "The noise in my head is growing louder. I fear it will drown out all my thoughts entirely. That's the scariest part." Morgan had already decided she would not abandon the old woman in her time of need. "You know what? Wait for me here. I'll ask for some time off work, and we'll figure out what to do. Everything will be all right. Don't worry." Morgan returned to the kitchen and asked Matilda to cover for her while she quickly got dressed. She feared the old woman might wander off and she wouldn't be able to find her again. The elderly lady was clearly not in her right mind and might forget their conversation and her promise to wait. "I'll cover for you," Matilda said. "Just hurry back." Morgan knew exactly where to go. Their city had several social shelters. The old woman was likely unaware of these places, having even forgotten about the police. Morgan led her to a shelter just a couple of blocks from the restaurant. A well-dressed woman in her 50s with attentive blue eyes greeted them. Morgan and the old woman shared their story with her. "Will you help us?" Morgan asked, her voice filled with hope and desperation. She couldn't bear the thought of leaving the old woman on the streets. If the shelter couldn't take her in, Morgan would bring her home, despite her mother's fragile health. "You don't have any documents, of course," the woman said to the old lady, who sighed and shook her head. Morgan feared they would be turned away, but the woman continued, "All right, that's not a problem." Morgan and the old woman exchanged glances, first confused, then overjoyed. They embraced, overcome with emotion. "Thank you so much," Morgan said, beaming. "Yes, thank you," the old woman echoed. "I can't believe I'll be sleeping in a real bed tonight with clean sheets." "If you're lucky, you might even make it in time for dinner," the woman said. "But first our medical staff will need to examine you, given your time on the streets." Once the formalities were complete, Morgan hurried back to the restaurant. Matilda couldn't cover for her the entire shift, and Morgan was grateful for the time she had. Her heart felt light, knowing she had done the right thing. She couldn't have lived with herself if she had ignored the old woman's plight. Morgan planned to visit the old woman at the shelter and help search for her family. She was determined to print flyers with the woman's photo and post them around the city, with Daniel's help. The shelter staff suspected the old woman was not local, as she had been found at the train station, but they would involve the police in the search for her relatives. Back at the restaurant, Morgan sensed something was wrong. Gregory was furious, and Matilda confirmed her fears. "He's been raging since you left," Matilda said. "I tried to cover for you, but he insisted on seeing you. He's waiting in his office." Morgan's stomach churned with fear as she entered her boss's office. Gregory looked at her, not with anger, but with that unsettling interest that always unnerved her. "In trouble again, I see," he said, his eyes scanning her. Morgan nodded, remembering the last time she had to leave work unexpectedly when Iris fell ill. The school had called, and Morgan had no choice but to rush to her sister's side. Matilda had tried to cover for her then too, but to no avail. Another time Morgan's mother suddenly fell ill. She called, her voice weak, asking Morgan to come home quickly. Without hesitation, Morgan rushed home, not bothering to ask for permission to leave work. Fortunately, her mother was fine. It was just a reaction to the sudden temperature drop. However, Morgan's abrupt departure did not go unnoticed. She was reprimanded by her boss and lost her bonus. He hinted that her compliance would prevent further issues, but Morgan pretended not to understand. And now she was caught again. "What am I supposed to do with an employee like you?" Gregory asked, his gaze fixed on Morgan, as if genuinely seeking an answer. He leaned in, his voice low. "There's only one solution. Dismissal with a bad recommendation. What did you expect, dear? A breach of workplace discipline." Morgan remained silent, hoping he would settle for a reprimand and docking her pay, as he had before. He was unpleasant, but bearable. Gregory stood and approached her, invading her personal space. She could smell his sweat, mingling with the sharp scent of expensive cologne. He brushed a stray lock of her hair. Morgan endured the touch, though it repulsed her. "There is another option," he said, his eyes locked onto hers. "We leave right after your shift. Go somewhere quiet and pleasant, where no one will disturb us." His heavy, sweaty hand rested on her shoulder. Morgan remained silent. "Why so quiet?" he smirked, pretending not to understand again. "Let me be clear. Either you come with me now and enjoy the benefits, or you're laid off, with a note in your record. Decide quickly." "Go to hell," Morgan retorted, shrugging off his hand. "Fire me! You're disgusting! The sight of you makes me sick, let alone going anywhere with you." With that, Morgan stormed out of the office, ignoring the bewildered stares of Matilda and her colleagues. She rushed out of the restaurant, tears streaming down her face as she walked briskly to calm herself. Fear gripped her. What would she do now? She needed to find a new job quickly, but she didn't regret her actions. She had done the right thing by helping the old woman and standing up to Gregory. Before entering her home, Morgan paused to compose herself. She didn't want to worry her mother, who was growing weaker by the day. That evening, she told Daniel everything, sobbing in his arms. He gently stroked her back and hair, comforting her. "I wish you'd told me sooner about your boss," Daniel said through gritted teeth. "I would have had a word with him, and I still will." "It's pointless," Morgan sniffled. "It will only cause more trouble for all of us. Promise me you won't go to him." "Then let me help you find another job," Daniel insisted. "You couldn't work under someone like him for long." "You're right," Morgan agreed. "I feel relieved, even though I know I probably won't find a job with the same pay." Matilda called that evening, offering her sympathy and cursing Gregory. It was comforting. The next morning, Morgan received a call from her former boss. He apologised, a rarity for him, and begged her to return, promising to behave appropriately. Morgan refused, changing her phone number to avoid further problems. She began her job search in earnest, knowing she couldn't afford to be out of work for long. However, finding a suitable position proved challenging. Most jobs didn't offer the right schedule or adequate pay. As she had feared, finding a job comparable to her previous one was difficult. Daniel supported her as best he could. He helped her with her relatives and gave her money. Although Morgan knew it very well, he was having a hard time himself. He also had accompanied her to the shelter and met the elderly lady Morgan had helped. The trio quickly became friends, finding joy in each other's company. And then one day, the elderly woman was reunited with her family. When Morgan and Daniel visited the shelter, they were informed that her relatives had taken her home. "Do you have their contact information?" Daniel asked. "We didn't even get to say goodbye." "I'm afraid that's confidential," the shelter employee replied. "We can't disclose it. But don't worry, the elderly woman is in good hands. Her relatives are quite well off. I wish I were in her shoes." Morgan and Daniel were overjoyed to hear that the unfortunate woman was safe and happy with her family. They had little time to dwell on her fate, as they faced their own challenges. Morgan was desperate for work, and Daniel discouraged her from taking unsuitable jobs. "Calm down, we'll find something better," he reassured her. "This isn't right for you. We won't starve. You have me." Then Daniel found a job listing for a maid in a wealthy household. He actively helped Morgan in her job search and supported her every step of the way. She knew she couldn't have managed without him. "Listen, there's an opening for a maid," Daniel said. "The pay is good and the hours are flexible. It's perfect for you. Give them a call." Morgan had never considered working as a maid, but the pay was attractive. She called the number Daniel provided and was invited for an interview. Upon seeing the potential employer's home for the first time, Morgan was awestruck. The mansion was enormous, with a vast garden, a pool and a fountain. The interior was equally lavish. A middle-aged woman in a conservative blue dress greeted her. Her calm demeanour and attentive eyes put Morgan at ease. She was the housekeeper, responsible for hiring staff. They spoke in the living room, where the housekeeper asked Morgan questions. Though she sensed she was making a good impression, Morgan dared not hope she would be hired. Suddenly she heard footsteps on the grand staircase. Turning around, she was astonished to see the familiar elderly woman descending the stairs. But this was no longer the dishevelled old woman from the streets. She was now an elegant lady, dressed in a stylish pantsuit, her hair neatly styled and her makeup subtle yet refined. She bore an even stronger resemblance to her famous namesake. Morgan stared in disbelief as the woman approached, her eyes filled with surprise and joy. She embraced Morgan warmly. "My dear girl, I've been trying to find you for 3 days, and here you are," she exclaimed. "Did that girl from your old job tell you where to find me? Matilda, I believe." Morgan was overjoyed and couldn't say a word. "Mrs. Smith, this young lady is here to apply for the maid position," the housekeeper explained. "So, this is a coincidence?" Mrs. Smith asked, incredulous. "It seems so," Morgan replied, smiling. "So your name is Mrs. Smith? Tell me everything. Have you regained your memory? What happened?" The tactful housekeeper excused herself to make coffee, leaving Mrs. Smith and Morgan to talk in private. The elderly woman began her remarkable tale. Her son, Andre, had seen the flyers Morgan and Daniel posted around the city and came to the shelter to take her home. Immediately, Mrs. Smith began taking the medication prescribed by her doctor months earlier. It turned out that she had suffered a stroke 3 months prior. Though she recovered quickly, crucial areas of her brain responsible for memory were affected. As part of her rehabilitation, she needed to take serious medications for an extended period. Mrs. Smith diligently took her pills, but once she forgot to do it, then forgot again, and eventually her memory shut down completely. That day she wandered out of the house in her nightgown, oblivious to the cold and snow. Surprisingly, no one stopped her or tried to help, assuming she was a homeless person, best avoided. Mrs. Smith was reported missing, but the police were investigating a possible kidnapping for ransom, following a false lead. You know the rest. I came to my senses at the train station, found warm clothes in a dumpster and began a new life. My old memories vanished. The noise in my head grew louder, unsurprising since I had stopped taking my medication. My condition worsened, and I don't know what would have happened if not for you, dear girl. Anyone in my position would have done the same, Morgan said, shaking her head. I'm glad for you. Oh, not everyone would have acted as you did, Mrs. Smith replied. Remember how your boss yelled at me? He could have tried to understand my situation at least. By the way, I fired him. You did? Morgan asked, astonished. How did you manage that? You see, Morgan, I didn't just wander into your restaurant by chance. It seemed familiar to me. That's because my son Andre owns the chain, and I am a co-owner. I've been there many times, and that manager Gregory was always flattering me. Of course, he didn't recognise me in that dirty, tattered coat, but that doesn't excuse him. As soon as I regained my senses, I went to the restaurant to confront him. There was nothing to discuss. I decided to fire him immediately. A restaurant is a place for people, and those who work there should treat customers with respect, not contempt. I also wanted to see you, Morgan, to thank you and share my story, but you had already been fired, and your friend Matilda told me what happened. That only strengthened my resolve to dismiss that scoundrel. There are far more worthy candidates for the manager's position. I asked Matilda to contact you, but my number was disconnected, Morgan explained. I changed it and hadn't given Matilda the new one yet. Well, I was sure that I would find you eventually. Mrs. Smith smiled. But here you are. What a joy, and what a remarkable coincidence. Morgan strolled through the spring city, enjoying the scent of lilacs and mock orange blossoms filling the air. Iris was in after-school care until 6, giving Morgan time to walk and think pleasant thoughts. Her life had changed dramatically since that fateful meeting with Mrs. Smith. Now, Morgan worked as a translator in one of her son's restaurants. The job was everything she had dreamed of and more: a generous salary, flexible hours, and the opportunity to use her language skills with international guests. The work inspired her and motivated her to grow in her chosen field. Morgan's mother was receiving treatment at an expensive clinic, the same one that had helped Mrs. Smith recover. Her progress was encouraging, improving daily. Morgan felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, a burden she hadn't realized she carried. Life grows lighter and more joyful with each passing day. This is your reward for your kindness and compassion, Daniel would say, just like in old fairy tales. People didn't come up with them for nothing. Kindness always attracts kindness.